Hello, Podheads. Welcome back to another episode of Over My Dead Pod. I'm your host for today's episode, Kylie Colwell.
And I'm Holly Lamoureux.
Today, we're going to go a little north to take a deep dive into one of Canada's biggest cases of the 90s. It was quite the media spectacle because the story was just insane. A respectable and nice-looking wife and husband were on trial for multiple rapes and murders. The crimes they were on trial for were absolutely despicable, crimes that terrorized the Toronto area for years. This is a story of Paul Bernardo and Karla Homolka, known as the Ken and Barbie killers. So we'll start with Paul Bernardo, aka the Ken of the story. He was born on August 27th, 1964, in Scarborough, Ontario. Today, Scarborough is a district of Toronto, but during Paul's childhood, it was its own separate town. On the surface, Paul appeared to be ordinary. Friends described him as attractive, charismatic, outgoing. He stayed out of trouble, was involved in all the extracurricular activities, kind of a popular boy. But behind closed doors, Paul's home life was deeply dysfunctional. Years later, investigators learned that his dad, Kenneth Bernardo, was a sexual predator who committed offenses against children and abused members of his own family. Paul's mom also struggled with mental health issues, including depression and agoraphobia. That's one where you're like scared to leave your house.
Gotcha. Yeah, I could see it.
As Paul grew older, tensions inside the home increased. There was one pivotal moment when he was 16 that kind of changed the trajectory of his life. Or maybe it was who he always was. I don't know. But when Paul was 16, his mom told him that Kenneth was not his dad. In fact, he was a result of an affair she had. From that point, Paul despised his mom, calling her a whore, slut, all the words, and she would in turn call him a bastard. According to later accounts, the revelation profoundly affected him and intensified his anger. By his late teens, Paul was secretly a pyromaniac, misogynist, and developed some dark sexual perversions. After one of his girlfriends left him for one of his friends, Paul set fire to all of her belongings. Other girlfriends reported that their relationships were marked by manipulation, intimidation, threats, and emotional abuse. The facade was starting to fade, at least with women who dated Paul, but no one could have imagined that what Paul was thinking or dreaming of could have been even more dark. He had this fantasy of what he called a virgin farm.
Oh, okay.
So his idea was he would have this compound of virgins. He would take their virginity and impregnate them, and then their daughters, who would also be his daughters, and then create another generation of virgins, and the cycle would repeat.
Men, give men like this a lobotomy. What do we do? I just think a jail's too good.
A lobotomy and castration, please.
Castration, there we go. That's a great
Mhm.
idea.
So, looking back, investigators and criminal psychologists would later identify many of these behaviors as early indicators of a developing pattern of coercion, control, possibly sociopathy.
It's never women. It's never women that are like, I want to have a cult. I want to have a bunch of husbands.
I want to be the first.
I don't even, one? Too many. You know what I'm saying?
You have a good point. You have a good point.
It's never women. Sorry, had to circle back to that. I'm just thinking.
So, one of the recurring themes throughout this case is how effectively Paul compartmentalized his life. To some people, he was charming and personable. To others, he was arrogant but harmless. He maintained employment, he socialized with friends, he appeared outwardly successful. At the same time, prosecutors later argued that he was cultivating violent fantasies and increasingly viewing women as objects just to dominate and control. This duality became one of the most disturbing aspects of the case. The image he projected publicly was radically different from what investigators would eventually uncover. And by the mid 1980s, that hidden side began emerging in terrifying ways. In 1987, police in Scarborough began to take notice of a troubling pattern. Young women were being attacked while they walked home alone late at night. Many had just stepped off buses, others were right on their front steps when they were violently attacked. The rapes began on May 4th, 1987, when a 21-year-old woman was attacked in front of her parents' house. 10 days later, a 19-year-old was attacked in the backyard of her parents' house. In July, a woman was able to fight off the attacker, who later abandoned his plan. On September 29th, the attacker got a little more bold. This time, he broke into the bedroom of a 15-year-old girl and attacked her at knife point. When the victim's mother entered through the room and screamed, the attacker fled through the window again. This didn't scare him off completely, though. The attacks continued through 1990, in fact. In this 3-year span, 16 attacks were reported, with the victims ranging from 15 to 22. The media eventually gave the attacker a name, the Scarborough Rapist. The area was in an absolute panic. Girls and women changed their usual travel plans after the Toronto Police Service issued a warning to women traveling alone at night, especially those taking the bus. Police weren't just issuing warnings, they were full force trying to find this guy. They conducted surveillance operations, assigned officers to work on just these cases, distributed composite sketches, established hotlines. They did all the things. They even posted officers at bus stations, assuming the rapist was stalking women from there. On May 25th, 1988, an officer noticed a man hiding under a tree at one of these bus stations and approached him. But the guy ran off and was able to escape. Still, very suspicious. By 1990, investigators began receiving information that pointed directly toward Paul Bernardo. Several people submitted tips that Paul resembled the released sketches. One of these people was Tina Smyrnis. She was a wife of one of Paul's good friends, and she had a bit more information to provide. This wasn't just rumors, she had specific concerns. Tina told investigators that Paul frequently talked about sex, like in a way that was more than casual, to the point where it was awkward. He also described how rough he liked it. Tina also told officers that Paul had been called in on a rape investigation back in December of 1987, but he was never interviewed. So Tina knew about this incident, but I guess police didn't have a record of him being called in because that interview never took place. But this time, they did interview him, and Paul came in voluntarily. He also voluntarily provided DNA samples. Detectives asked why Paul thought he was being brought in, and he admitted he didn't look like the sketch. But in his usual charming way, he just talked himself out of being a suspect. If he was the rapist, obviously he wouldn't voluntarily come in and voluntarily give up his DNA. Or so police thought. And this is where one of the most significant failures in Canadian criminal justice occurred. The DNA sample Paul provided was submitted for testing, along with 130 other suspects, but months and months passed, and eventually years, before the results came back. There was such a massive backlog on DNA testing, it took 2 years for Paul's sample to be tested. In the meantime, Paul Bernardo was walking free, continuing to attack women, and he even got married. It's now October of 1987, while the attacks are still going on, when 23-year-old Paul met 17-year-old Karla Homolka in a hotel lobby. Karla was there for a pet convention. She went down to the lobby for a late night snack. Paul came down. They got to talking. Next thing you know, the two were hooking up that same night. Just to reiterate, Paul was 23 and Karla was 17. But the two were connected super quickly. They spent all of their time together. Paul was over at Karla's parents' house because, again, she was 17. But Karla's parents welcomed Paul with open arms. On the outside, he was a great guy, and he and Karla had a great relationship. But as the relationship deepened, Paul became increasingly controlling. Friends of the two would later report red flags like possessiveness, manipulation, and Karla herself reported physical abuse. At the same time, evidence later revealed that she was participating in these criminal acts we're going to talk about alongside Paul. The complexity of that dynamic would become central to the prosecution years later. There was a challenge, determining exactly where coercion ended and willing participation began. But before any of that happened, another victim entered the picture. Someone who should have been safe. Someone who trusted the people around her. And that was Karla's 14-year-old sister, Tammy. Tammy Homolka was born in 1975 and was described as your typical teenage girl for the time. She loved her family, and she had an entire future ahead of her. Tammy had absolutely no reason to suspect she was in danger from people inside her own home. So during this time, Paul and Karla, they're engaged. They're living at Karla's parents' house. Paul had lost his job as an accountant, and he was making money smuggling cigarettes between the US and Canada, which I guess was pretty lucrative at the time. Not sure why. But While Paul was living with Karla and her family, he became increasingly obsessed with her younger sister, Tammy. This is weird to hear because it's fucking weird. But while Paul and Karla were having sex, Paul would have a photo of her 14-year-old sister, Tammy, holding it, looking at it the entire time. Karla would also dress up in Tammy's clothes and pretend to be her.
Okay, I have heard this story before.
It's the
Till
weird
that.
things. Yes, the weird things
Sorry.
that remind you. hmm So this goes back to that virgin farm fantasy. Tammy was a virgin. Karla was not when her and Paul met, and that was something, according to Paul, Karla would never be able to give to him. And for most of us, if not all of us, your man having eyes on your sister, let alone your 14-year-old sister, would make you want to stab them. But Karla wasn't shutting any of this down. In fact, Karla facilitated the assault of her own sister. She crushed up Valium and put it into Tammy's food so Paul could go into her room and masturbate or even assault her in her sleep. There's no agreed amount of times this happened, but there was one night where we know what happened, and that was because unfortunately it resulted in Tammy's death. On the night of December 23rd, 1990, Karla, Paul, and Tammy stayed up watching movies and drinking. Unbeknownst to Tammy, her drinks were laced with halothane, which is a sleeping medication Karla had stolen from her job at a vet clinic. At some point, Tammy passed out, and both Paul and Karla undressed her and prepared for the attack. Karla herself even applied a cloth soaked with the drug over Tammy's mouth to keep her unconscious. Karla would later confess she did this because she wanted to gift her own sister's virginity, against her will, to Paul as a Christmas gift. The two dragged Tammy down to the basement and took turns raping her while the other filmed. So yes, they did film this. At some point, Tammy started to throw up and she stopped breathing. Paul and Karla did try to resuscitate Tammy, but it was unsuccessful. Before they called 911, they dressed Tammy back up, moved her to her bedroom, and cleaned up. Now, 15-year-old Tammy Homolka never regained consciousness and was pronounced dead a few hours later at the hospital. There, of course, was an investigation into Tammy's death. The 15-year-old doesn't just lose consciousness and die for no apparent reason. There was an autopsy, and the toxicology report showed nothing, and that was because the halothane used to sedate Tammy isn't included in your normal panel to test. The only thing that appeared off were these red marks around Tammy's mouth. Paul and Karla were questioned about the marks. They were the only ones awake when all this happened, and their story was maybe she got them from being dragged from the living room to her bedroom. In their story, they had moved her to her bedroom for better light. But investigators could never determine what exactly happened that night or how Tammy even died. No one thought for a second that Paul and or Karla had anything to do with it. So 3 weeks after Tammy's death, Paul and Karla made another little film. In this one, they talked about the assault on Tammy and how much they both enjoyed it. They ended the little home video with Karla dressing up in Tammy's clothes and the two having sex on Tammy's bed. And as if it couldn't get any worse, when Tammy was buried, Karla and Paul put their wedding invitation in the casket with her. Disgusting.
I have no words for these people.
Yep.
Sick to my stomach.
I will say, years later, when all this came to light, Tammy's body was exhumed and the invitation was taken out. So that's good. Paul and Karla continued on as if nothing happened while everyone else was grieving. They moved out of Karla's parents' house, or they were kind of basically forced to. Her parents were like, we need space to grieve. You two are, according to everyone around them, they're not grieving at all. They're not even pretending to grieve. They're only talking about themselves and their wedding. It was like Tammy never existed. So her parents are like, maybe you guys should move out.
Maybe you guys should go jump off a cliff.
That would have been a better suggestion. So the couple ended up getting married as planned in June of 1991, but just 2 weeks before that wedding, a young girl had vanished. Before that, though, there was another assault. On June 6th, Karla somehow lured a 15-year-old girl over to their house, and they basically repeated what they had done to Tammy. Drinks, movies, hanging out. But just like before, the girl's drink was laced with halothane. The two assaulted the anonymous girl together, and they also filmed it. Luckily, I guess, Karla learned the proper dosage of the halothane, and the girl survived. She woke up the next morning groggy, kind of sick. She had no recollection of the night before, but Paul and Karla were like, oh, you're just hungover. And the girl was like, okay, I guess, and went home. Karla told Paul that this was her wedding gift to him. This wasn't enough for him, apparently, because Paul sought out more girls on his own. It's June 15th, 1991, and 14-year-old Leslie Mahaffy got home after hanging out with her friends to find that the front door was locked. It was past Leslie's curfew, so I don't know if Leslie was locked out on purpose or if her parents had just fallen asleep, but Leslie decided she didn't want to wake her parents up, so she decided to wait outside in the backyard. It's 2:30, 3 in the morning, and Paul just walks up to her, out of the bushes. Apparently, he was out stealing license plates to use when he was smuggling cigarettes across the border, and he just so happened to find a girl his type, just hanging out in the backyard. They start chatting. Paul was good looking and charming. Leslie, I guess, didn't sense any danger. She ended up asking him for a cigarette, and Paul said, sure, but you need to come to my car to get them with me, and we can smoke together there. Instead, Paul forced Leslie into his car, blindfolded her, and drove her back to his house with Karla, just waiting for their next victim. They did their usual routine with what they said was the intention of letting Leslie go, and that was until her blindfold slipped. Fearing that Leslie would be able to identify them, they made a decision that they had to murder her. Karla later told investigators that Paul strangled Leslie. Paul said that Karla gave her a lethal dose of halcyon, another sedative. Either way, the two hid Leslie's body in their basement because Karla's family was coming over for dinner and to see their new house. The next day, Leslie's body was dismembered and the different parts were encased in cement. Luckily for investigators, Paul kept the receipts for the dozens of bags of cement he had bought. Dummy move, Paul. The cement blocks were dumped into Lake Gibson, about 11 miles south of their house. Well, except for one block. I guess that was too heavy to be pushed into the lake. It was just kind of sitting on the shore. Coincidentally, that cement block was discovered on June 29th, 1991, same day as Paul and Karla's wedding. Before that, though, there was a massive search for Leslie Mahaffy. The case was perplexing because she seemed to have just vanished into thin air. Investigators knew she did get home that night because at some point Leslie had walked to a payphone and called a friend, asking if she could stay at her place since she was locked out. During the call, Leslie changed her mind and said she would just wait it out at home since she had no way of getting to her friends. She wasn't the type to run away. There weren't any issues going on in her life. Investigators were looking for some random kidnapper who just happened to have caught Leslie at this perfect time. A needle in a haystack type of situation. Even with the discovery and identification of Leslie, there weren't many clues. Meanwhile, Paul's DNA sample was still sitting in that lab, awaiting testing. Within less than a year, another family would experience an unimaginable nightmare. On April 16th, 1992, Karla and Paul were prowling around town hunting for their next victim when they found themselves in front of Holy Cross Secondary School as the students were being dismissed for the day. And that's when they spotted 15-year-old Kristen French. Karla went up to her, holding a map, and according to witnesses, looked like she was asking for directions. Other students saw Karla approach Kristen, laying out the map on the hood of the car, and then Paul emerging from the car and literally forcing Kristen in and driving off. So some of the accounts of this are no, they forced Kristen in the car, but then others are the students who saw this said it didn't look like a struggle, nothing to raise alarm. So literally no one said anything about it. None of the witnesses could really provide a good description of the two people they saw with Kristen either. The search for Kristen was prompt. Usually she would walk home from school and be there in about 10 minutes. When she didn't arrive, her parents immediately contacted police, and within hours, a large-scale search operation was underway. Investigators retraced her route, volunteers canvassed the neighborhood, and Kristen French's photo was plastered on every media outlet. The search continued day after day, with the only clue being one of Kristen's shoes left in the parking lot, the only real evidence of a struggle. About 2 weeks later, on April 30th, Kristen French's nude body was discovered in a ditch about 45 minutes away and suspiciously close to where Leslie had been buried. Kristen's body had been washed and her hair had been cut off, but she was quickly identified. The pathologist determined that the cause of death was strangulation. According to Karla, after holding Kristen captive and torturing her for 3 days, Paul strangled her for 7 minutes while she watched. Paul, on the other hand, said Karla beat Kristen with a rubber mallet. Unlike in Leslie's case, Kristen was never blindfolded, and prosecutors would later use this at trial to theorize that the plan was always to murder Kristen. Investigators immediately recognized the similarities with the cases of Leslie and Kristen, two teenage girls taken within a short period of time and with substantial steps to conceal evidence. The community was dealing with fear that came with the Scarborough Rapist being on the loose, and now there's a killer. So obviously they were putting pressure on the police to catch whoever was doing this. No one knew, of course, that it was the same guy, and also now this guy and his wife. So in response to all this public pressure, authorities assembled an investigative team and named them the Green Ribbon Task Force. The goal was simple: find whoever was responsible for the murders of Leslie Mahaffy and Kristen French. Thousands of tips were reviewed, witnesses were interviewed over and over again. And at the same time, different investigators were still working on the Scarborough Rapist cases. What nobody fully appreciated yet was that all of those investigations were converging toward the same person, Paul Bernardo. But that DNA sample he had given had still not been tested. It was just sitting there in line. As investigators dug deeper, Paul's name kept coming up. People who knew him contacted police saying he looked just like the sketch. They described his troubling behavior, but the task force didn't have a direct connection. Not yet, at least. Finally, in December of 1992, more than 2 years after Paul submitted his DNA sample, testing confirmed it was a match. Paul Bernardo was the Scarborough Rapist. But even more troubling questions emerged. Could Leslie and Kristen still be alive if the testing had happened sooner? Could other victims have been protected? Those questions continue to haunt discussions of the case decades later. At almost the same time, investigators were learning about the DNA match. Paul and Karla's marriage was reaching the breaking point. In December of 92, Paul beat Karla so severely she required hospitalization. When she recovered, Karla did leave, and she moved in with her aunt and uncle and later filed charges against Paul. Paul was released on his own recognizance. Don't fret, investigators were surveilling him basically 24/7 at the time. They also went to talk to Karla, who basically just talked about herself and the abuse against her the entire time. Which is a big point of contention in this case, is Karla's involvement and willingness, but we'll get more into that later. But detectives started asking her more questions about their other victims. They asked if she had ever been to Holy Cross Secondary School. That's where Karla lured in Kristen. They asked if she had ever cut someone's hair, like Kristen's had been. Karla didn't give up much information. She was still protecting Paul and herself. But as soon as the detectives left, Karla spilled everything to her aunt and uncle. She told them that Paul was the Scarborough Rapist, and also he had videotapes of the two of them having sex with Leslie and Kristen. She didn't spill everything.
Yeah, he's the rapist. Just kidding, you are too.
He's the rapist. Also, we just so happen to have videos of us having sex, aka raping, underage girls who were later found to be murdered.
Yeah.
Coincidence, yeah. But she went on to tell her aunt and uncle that she tried to find the tapes after Paul had been arrested for assaulting her, but they weren't in their usual spot. Before this, the tapes were up in the rafters in the garage, but they mysteriously vanished. Karla ended up hiring an attorney, and they went to the police with the deal. Karla would cooperate and testify against Paul. They would turn in the videotapes once they found them. And in exchange, Karla would get full immunity. The prosecutor was like, hell no, but thank you for telling us about the videotapes. So now they had to find those. But Karla did end up telling police mostly everything, but of course downplaying her involvement in it all. She told them about the rape victims, Leslie, Kristen, and even her sister Tammy. But in each story, Karla said she was forced to participate or she was faced with abuse from Paul. Which, yes, Paul did abuse Karla. It's documented. She's been hospitalized. We know that. So officers took her word for this, and they wouldn't learn until it was too late how much Karla actually was involved or how much she enjoyed this. On February 17th, Paul Bernardo was finally arrested, and investigators immediately began tearing the house apart looking for these tapes. And by tearing it apart, I mean it. They literally were removing walls. They were in that house tearing it apart for 71 days.
They dismantled the home.
When I read that, I kept thinking of Extreme Makeover Home Edition, demo day.
Yeah, they demoed that house. Okay. But were they hiding things in the walls?
They couldn't find the tapes. They only found one tape.
Okay, so I mean, yeah, I guess technically they could do whatever they wanted to find that anywhere that it could be hidden.
So they found the one tape, and this one tape only showed Karla performing oral sex on one of the Jane Doe rape victims. So all the tapes that Karla described showing all the other victims and the murders couldn't be located. And then, the day after the searches were completed, magically, Paul called up his attorney and told him exactly where the tapes were. They were hidden in the overhead light fixture in the primary bathroom. Investigators were in there for 71 days and they missed that.
They were tearing up the walls and it's in the light fixture.
So his attorney went, got them, brought him back to his office. Did that attorney hand over the tapes to the police and prosecution as he was obligated to? No, he did not.
Oh.
He kept those tapes in his office for 17 months.
Why?
According to the attorney, Paul told him not to watch them, so he just didn't.
Oh, okay.
And he didn't watch them until 4 days after Karla's plea agreement was finalized. So without the tapes, the prosecution had a difficult decision. If they pursued charges against Paul and Karla without Karla's cooperation, they would lose their strongest witness against Paul. If they offered a plea agreement, they risked criticism for allowing Karla to receive a reduced sentence. Ultimately, prosecutors chose the second option. On May 14th, 1993, the plea agreement was finalized. Karla agreed to testify against Paul. In exchange, she would plead guilty to 2 counts of manslaughter and receive only a 12-year prison sentence.
Yeah, no.
So this was signed. It's official. No changing it. 4 days later is when Paul's attorney gave them the tapes. And they, of course, showed Karla actively participating in the kidnapping, torture, rapes, and murders. Not just actively participating, it appeared like she was very happy to be involved. Enjoyed it. Paul's attorney did get in trouble. I think he got arrested. I don't think he got disbarred. I think the charges got dismissed. No one in the public knew the extent of Karla's involvement until Paul's trial, which didn't begin until 1995. There was like a publication ban. The judge for Paul's trial wanted to make sure fair, easy trial, so no one knew about Karla and her plea deal until after Paul's trial. So prosecutors presented evidence connecting him to the murders and assaults. Jurors heard testimony from investigators, forensic experts, and witnesses. They learned about the years-long investigation. They learned about the DNA evidence. And perhaps most significantly, they heard testimony from Karla. She kept up with her story, despite the tapes. She was a battered wife forced to participate. And then the tapes were shown to the jury.
Okay, good.
And that's when everyone realized who Karla really was, and the media deemed her little plea deal the deal with the devil. On September 1st, 1995, Paul Bernardo was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder for the deaths of Leslie Mahaffy and Kristen French. He was also convicted of 2 counts of kidnapping, forcible confinement, aggravated sexual assault, and committing an indignity to a body. For the life of me, I could not figure out why no one was charged with the murder of Tammy, or Paul was never charged with any of the other rapes. Just these 2 murders. I guess they figured that was enough. I don't know. Paul was sentenced to life in prison and was also designated a dangerous offender. That designation is significant in Canada because it recognizes that an offender presents an ongoing risk to society, thus making release far less likely. Over the years, Paul Bernardo has remained incarcerated. He has repeatedly sought parole, and luckily for all of us, all of those applications have been denied. And even luckier for us, he has been having a terrible time in prison and allegedly has been jumped several times. In 2006, Paul reportedly admitted to a journalist to the assault of 10 other women, most of which were in 1986. And this was a year before the Scarborough Rapist cases, or what they considered to be the Scarborough Rapist cases. Cops just hadn't connected those to him yet. Paul Bernardo has not been charged with any more crimes, and it doesn't appear that authorities in Canada are interested in going to trial for more that they have since tied to Paul. As for Karla, well, her story since has been quite interesting. Usually, inmates can apply for parole once they have completed 2/3 of their sentence, In Karla's case, the National Parole Board deemed that Karla remained a risk and she must serve her full 12-year sentence. As the date of her release approached, all of Canada was basically in an uproar, rightfully so. No one wanted her to move into their town. But the date came, July 4th, 2005. She wasn't just released without restrictions, all free and nilly. In fact, she was given 9 that she had to follow, or else she would go right back to prison. Karla had to continually update authorities with her address, name changes. If she was going to be gone from home for more than 48 hours, she had to give notice. She couldn't contact Paul, any of the victims, or their families. She had to provide a DNA sample, go to counseling. Karla was also forbidden from interacting with anyone under the age of 16. Karla agreed to all this and settled into a new home in Quebec. She bounced around a bit, got married, and had children.
Oh no.
She even tried to have her name legally changed, which luckily was rejected. Everywhere Karla has gone, her neighbors eventually figure out who she is and what she did. Reportedly, when Karla gave birth, several nurses refused to take care for her, which props to them. Parents of her kids' classmates have obviously raised concerns and pulled their kids from those schools. But Karla is a free woman, married with children. She no longer has those restrictions in place. So, following Paul and Karla's convictions, the Ontario government commissioned a review of what went wrong in this investigation. They identified breakdowns in communication, coordination, and information sharing among agencies. Most importantly, the delay in DNA testing proved catastrophic. From this review, Canada implemented a new case management system to improve information sharing across different agencies and to also speed along DNA testing. This case changed Canada forever. It changed how investigators share information, how prosecutors evaluate plea agreements, and how many Canadians viewed the criminal justice system. For the families of Tammy Homolka, Leslie Mahaffy, and Kristen French, and all the unnamed survivors, no report, review, or conviction can undo the losses they suffered. But remembering their lives and learning from what happened is one way to honor them and to do better. And that was the story of Paul Bernardo and Karla Homolka. Very interested to hear what the listeners think of Karla's little plea deal. I'm sure we're all angry.
Yeah, hopefully. I mean, I hope there's no one that feels she was not justified in not getting that plea agreement.
I really wonder if Paul told his attorney not to watch the tapes until Karla's plea deal was finalized.
Yeah. But like, who listens to that?
I don't know if it's just super nosy, but yeah, my criminal defendant is on trial for like a bunch of murders and rapes, and there's these secret hidden tapes, and you're going to tell me not to watch? I'm watching them as soon as I get home.
I'm an investigator. You tell me not to watch anything, I'm watching it.
I'm bringing the DVR to the tapes.
Yeah, immediately. Of course he's gonna tell him not to watch it. I mean, well, honestly, like who would even think that would work?
It did.
Wild. You just gotta put yourself out there. You just gotta, you never know. You never know what's gonna work.
Apparently, he's a
Wow.
very convincing man. I mean, he would just walk in the police station, interviews, yeah, here's DNA sample. He had no idea that they weren't going to test it for 2 years.
And they didn't test for 2 years, just backlog or
Yep.
wow. Someday I wish we could do something about that.
Hint, hint.
Hint, hint.
All right, should we jump in overtime?
Okay, while you have been talking, I have been thinking. This case makes me think there are certain things, some criminal, some social personality, that men would do that women would never. For instance, like we just talked about, wanting to start a virgin cult. Women, or wanting to have multiple wives. I maybe there's a woman out there, but I promise you, you're going to find way less women who want to have like 6 husbands.
No, I mean, immediately after I said that, I was like, actually, I want less men in my life.
Yeah, I don't just want to start a religion to have more women in my life, or I mean, to have more men in my life, but men do. Strange.
I don't understand men. Honestly, I don't get them.
I don't either. Also, just normal things that men that men do that women would never have that problem.
Men, they'll go out with their buddies or whatever. One of their buddies will be like, "Oh yeah, I'm getting a divorce," or blah blah. This happens. They ask no follow-up questions. They don't
Yeah.
try to get to the bottom of things. They don't ask for more tea. You try to get a man to gossip. Good luck.
Oh, Luke will not tell me stuff. Like, and it's not like he's doing it on purpose. Like crazy things will happen. And then he'll be like, "Oh yeah, I knew about that." And I'm like, "You knew about that and you didn't come and tell me?" That is strange behavior.
Yeah, now I think you're hiding something.
Yeah. I'm like, I'm calling, if I hear tea, if I hear drama, I'm calling you immediately. And most of the time he's like, okay. I'm like, you don't even appreciate it. Goodbye. You know?
Yeah, this is juicy. Ask questions.
They don't ask questions. They don't even remember the things. The amount of times that Luke has told me a story of something that happened, and he's like, I don't really remember like what happened next or what he said to her. I'm like, no, you can't do this to me.
You need to start writing it down, buddy.
Yeah.
Really bothers me. Men do not create shopping lists, grocery lists.
Mm-mm. And that's why they're incompetent.
They just show up and they're like, I think I needed this. Oh, and then they get home. Oh, I meant to get this. If you had a list, that wouldn't have happened.
And you over get stuff. The amount of times I've sent Luke to go get something, he comes back with 50 different things, but like only two out of the three I've asked for.
Yeah. Or you'd be like, you put bread on the shopping list and they're at the store. What kind of bread? The same one we always get.
That's another thing. Men can't find things.
You have to send them a picture of it and what aisle it is on.
But they can't find things normal life. Like they can't find their belongings, they can't find their stuff. This morning, it was Luke was leaving super early and he was like he needed something out of my car, I guess. I was like half awake and he was like, "Where is this?" And I was like I was trying to say the least amount of words possible. Like, "It's in my car." Because I'm trying to go back to sleep. He's like, "Where in your car?" And I was like, "It's under the seat." "Which seat?" "Go freaking look. There's only four of them, dude. There's only four. Like, don't ask me. Like,
It's not a sprinter van.
yeah, there's not 12 seats. It's going to take you more time trying to get this answer from me than it would be for you to just go do the work yourself and look under the seats. Actually, there's only two really because the back seat's like a bucket. Like, they can't find things.
You know what they really can't do is multitask.
They can't. No,
I
especially Luke. He can't.
My boyfriend the other day was putting a pizza in the oven. I said, "Hey, while the oven's preheating, before we put the pizza in, do you want to go? We're painting something. We'll like go put the primer on it, spray it down real
Mhm.
quick, and then by the time pizza's done, we can paint it." He's like, "No, I don't like doing two things at once." I was like, "Oh, so you're just gonna sit at the couch and stare at the wall while the oven's preheating?
You're gonna watch the oven? He
You think
can't
it's gonna
do
be
anything else. He's gonna sit there and watch the oven. Yeah.
no?" And then what's he do? Puts on the TV, doesn't hear the oven ding. How did you survive this long?
Very slowly. They don't get a lot done, if you haven't noticed. Yeah, Luke is a really terrible multitasker. I mean, he has ADHD so bad that like he can't talk and be on his phone at the same time. Like I'm surprised that he can walk and talk. He can't be on his phone and talk. Like the amount of times I'm just sitting there staring at him while we're in the middle of a conversation, he'll just stop talking because he'll see something on his phone that distracts him. And then I just sit there and I just
Yeah.
watch and I just wait for him to come back, enter reality.
I feel like I'm the opposite. Like I'm on the phone with someone, I mean, I'm having a full-blown conversation, but I'm also playing solitaire at the same time. I can't just be
Oh,
talking.
same. I'm listening to you guys' story. I'm playing a game on my phone. If I'm reading a book, I have music on or I have a t show going in the background. Like I'll read and listen to something at the same time.
Oh yeah. I can't do my work at my job unless something is playing.
Same. Men could never.
Never.
There's a lot more, and I'm sure Kate will have more to add. Honestly, this can be an ongoing overtime because there's just a lot. There's a lot of things that I need to bring up.
For our
I'm
male listeners, please don't leave. We love you. All right. Make sure you like, subscribe, follow, comment, all the things. Oh, we got little butters on the screen
Yeah, she'll say bye.
instead of Millie this week. Spoilers.
Yeah.
All right, we'll see you next week with another episode of Over My Dead Pod. Bye.
Bye.